Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Milan Bhai. Thanks for this invitation. And it was nice to see a brief of what was already discussed, and it is very rich and good input. And I agree with much of what is said, so I don't have to repeat it. See, I have always believed that the real solution of many of the problems that we are facing today is around redistribution of natural resources to the local communities. Uh, Whether it is the issue of poverty, disparity, migration, violence, climate crisis, uh, and unless people have control over natural resources, unless people have control over decision making, nothing is going to change. No. According to me, even the success of SDG, Sustainable Development goal will very much depend on how far we will advance in this direction in terms of people's control over natural resources and people's control over decision making. Otherwise, we are not going to go very far. That is why Mahatma Gandhi said that, look, self sufficient, self governed communities should be the base for building a nation. Without self-sufficient communities and self-governed communities, ruling from the top is not going to make a good state, a good country, a good community. So on this issue of land reform, I can think two methods today. I'm just flagging it. I mean, some of it may even look funny, but now look, two methods that are coming to my mind today for reflection is that uh, according to me, there is a thing called people-led land reforms. It's like state-led land reforms. We will come to that later, because we are expecting a state that doesn't really represent the people in many cases to reform in the interest of poor people. So, what is this people-centered land reforms? You see, Vinoba Bhave, a disciple of Mahatma Gandhi, tried it in India, and he was able to collect 4.2 million acres of land and redistribute that among landless people. His position was, look, approaching the state is basically approaching the representatives of the people. Now, why do you go to the representatives when you have the capacity to go to the people directly? So rather than going to the representatives, can we approach the people and request them to address this issue? Because I think this is a time to do it. Why I say this? Society need to think how to make the society better. Now, rather than expecting a government to think about everything, why can't the society think how to make the society better? And society as a whole should also feel very proud when they solve many of the problems that they are facing today. So, can ultimately society take responsibility for change, including land reforms and control over resources, etc. Uh, Look, let me give you some examples of why community need to take responsibility. See, much of the commons in the villages, in the communities are controlled and occupied by farmers who already have land. So rather than allowing landless people to occupy the commons, it is in the hands of people who already have land. Why people settled abroad with huge income have land back home in the villages? Uh, why people who are paid and greatly and employed with good salaries hold on to land without cultivating? Or why companies are keeping so much excess land when millions of people are without an inch of land? So the society has become so selfish that they don't see that they also have a role, and everybody will say, go to the government, ask the government to change laws. So when the society is not taking responsibility for reforms and eradicate poverty and reduce violence, then things are not going to change. So we need to see why there is some serious problem with our societies, especially in southern part of the world, where people are pushed to Mediterranean Sea to sink and die, while people are not willing to distribute the resources that are there and can be resourced. So one argument I want to make today is that this is time for us to go back to the society, because that is where the power is originating. This power is given to the representatives, and we are running after the representatives, and the real power holders are not doing anything. So I'm speaking of countries where there is some amount of democracy. The second argument I want to make is the state-led land reforms. Uh, I want to say even weak states, you don't need a strong state to implement land reforms. There are many areas even a weak state can do. For example, the two questions that people generally raise is state, if you go to land reform, there will be conflict and violence, or we don't have enough land to redistribute. These arguments are useless because there are so many areas of land reforms, even without conflict, even without having land. For example, retrieval of lost land. Millions of people have lost their land. It is being occupied by powerful people. It's only taking the land and giving back to the people who are the owners of this land. You don't need extra land to give. So the idea we don't have land to give has no meaning. For example, regularization of land. Millions of people are already on a piece of land. It's only a question of regularizing. You don't have to find new land to give to them. So why can't regularize this land on which poor people are living already? Or resolve disputes. It's like how much money, how much time is spent by poor people going to the court for nothing. It is my own land. Please resolve this dispute so I can occupy this land and cultivate. So what I'm trying to say, even for a weak government, there are so many areas without conflict and violence, so many things can be solved. So the softer part of land reforms are not addressed. So one request that we should really take up globally is that don't speak about we don't have land to distribute and there will be violence, etc. Do the softer part of land reforms to begin with, and we will then go to the harder part of land reforms. The final thing, I know the 8 minutes will come soon. Final thing will be about mobilization, because scale is important. I believe that having organized many long marches, etc., I understand that scale is very important, and we need to really work hard to scale it up, because to speak to a government that doesn't represent the poor people anymore, we need the kind of strength, and this is a challenge that we are facing. But I think this is also an opportunity, because after COVID, millions of people have come back and they feel humiliated, they feel insulted, and their resources were taken away already, and they were pushed into cities. They are back now. There is no place to go. So there is a huge population now wanting to be mobilized around this issue of my rights, my land, my resources, etc. I think this is very important for all of us to understand this possibility and work around it. Finally, a well-organized mobilization also deserves a well-organized, well-trained cadre of a group of activists, because in the absence of a well-organized, well-trained activist, very often the movements are not succeeding. So that is a very important challenge, and I think we need to invest time and resources at that place right away, so that in the coming years, larger mobilization is possible. In India, of course, we are thinking about a pan-India movement, because in spite of many years of work, we are only in 150 districts out of 724 or 34. So this is not going to make the impact. So a pan-India movement is what we are planning. So pan-African, everywhere we will have to think of large-scale mobilization to address these issues. Thank you very much, Milun Bhai. That is what I wanted to bring in 8 minutes here.
Yeah.